Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Thanks so much for joining. We can see participants joining as we speak, so we'll just wait for that number to slow down or steady so we can see that everyone's joined, and then we'll get going. So we'll just be a couple of minutes and then we'll kick off. Okay, so it's just a couple of minutes past now, so we'll get going. And welcome to the Exploring the Durability of Community Business Research, Business in England Research webinar. Today on the webinar, there'll be Dr. Reinout Kleinhans, Steve Clare, and Amelia Byrne from the Research Department of Power to Change, and myself, Lucy, who will be hosting today and going through the slides. We'll be presenting the research, so you'll hear from the three presenters, but do feel free to ask questions throughout. If you could put all your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat function, and then that means if we don't get around to answering any of your questions throughout the webinar today, then we can get back to you afterwards, and it means all the questions are recorded. The chat facility is lost at the end of the webinar, so yeah, please do put those in the Q&A function on your control panel. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Amelia, who will just be introducing Power to Change very briefly, and then we'll get into the research.
Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Amelia. I'm the Research Officer at Power to Change. And if you didn't know us, Power to Change is an independent charitable trust supporting community businesses across England. So as well as supporting the community businesses, we fund a broad range of research into the community business market and the experiences of community businesses. Sorry, excuse me. So this research that we're presenting today was funded via the Open Call, which is a open call for research grant program that we run twice a year. And the research can range very broadly or be themed. And we typically fund sort of up to 4 projects per year. If you'd like to find out any more about this program, just have a look on our website. That's enough from me, so I'll pass on to Reinout now.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reinout Kleinhans. I'm an Associate Professor of Urban Regeneration at Delft University of Technology. And I was the principal investigator of this research project. And I will briefly give you an appetizer of the project and the results, not with the idea to tell you actually everything what's going on, but to make sure that you will actually read the full report after the seminar. So that would actually be my main aim, to make you curious about the project. A little bit of background, as Amelia also mentioned, this project was funded a year ago by the Open Research Grants Program. And we basically applied to the program with a proposal. And we is myself as PI, together with Steve Clare from CETA Consulting, who will be talking in the second half of the seminar part. And also joined in the consortium were Ingmar van Meerkerk and Rianne Warsen, both experts on community engagement, community enterprises, and also particularly the method that we use during our research, about which I will tell more in a minute. So we got funding from Power to Change, but it's important to emphasize that our research was conducted independently of Power to Change. So it is our research, and it means that Power to Change has supported it financially. However, the work and any views presented here are from the authors, so do not necessarily represent the views of Power to Change. So just as you know, this is an independent academic study supported by Power to Change. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so our starting point in the study is that we were already aware of a large amount of recent studies which actually outline what you could call success factors in relation to community businesses and community enterprises. So, and this is good research, but the thing is that there is now time to move actually beyond what we call success factors and what works. Because we know what we basically have at this stage is a list of potential success factors. So factors that are important in relation to the durability of community businesses. But we don't know yet how these success factors might interact or work together. So we need to go beyond the idea of having a list of factors to something which is a bit more complex. Next point, please. So what we aimed for with this research is to get a better understanding of the interplay and the combined impact of various conditions or success factors upon the durability of community businesses in England. So that means that we are primarily interested in how the success factors, which basically are already identified, work together in a kind of complex interplay to ensure or enhance durability of community businesses within the context of England, of course. So first I'll explain durability. So durability, again, which is based on literature. In the project, we basically talk about durability where the community business has community recognition. So it's truly recognized by the local community. It has financial stability, and that means that it covers for running cost and potentially kind of small profit. It has good staff capacity. So there might be people in paid employment or otherwise involved or volunteers, but there is a good staff capacity available. And the overall capability of community business to do basically the things that they find that they need to do. And these four factors, elements of durability, basically ensure that the business can continue realizing its goals for the benefit of the community it serves for an extended period of time. So this is really about long-term continuation in combination with goal realization. So it's not just about surviving as a community business, but also make sure that it's realizing its goals. So we deliberately chose not to use the term sustainability, which you sometimes also see, because that's, to our opinion, that's also maybe a little bit too much associated with things like climate sustainability and those kind of things. So durability is a bit more clean term. In the literature, which is basically already lying there, also in relation to success factors, we basically identified 5 conditions for durability. So these are kind of collective terms for a number of literature sources which all point at similar things. And we basically reviewed them and combined them and came up with 5 kind of encompassing labels for each of these conditions. So I think that most of them actually speak for themselves. Collective leadership of the community business, and especially collective element is important. Community engagement is at the very heart of the business, and engagement can mean various things, and accountability. The business model element, and strong networks and partnerships, of course, but also the aligned entrepreneurial culture. And this is, very briefly, this is a bit of a more complicated condition. And for example, it deals with entrepreneurial values, which are incorporated and shared in the business. And these values are as such that they make everyone pull together in a kind of same direction. And it's reflected in people that are willing to adapt and to embrace change, to take responsibility, to take risks. Here is the entrepreneurial element, of course, and to experiment, learn, and innovate. So this is quite a complex factor, and we will return to it later in the webinar again. 5 conditions, these 5. So briefly about the methods. We started out with desk research, and particularly a critical literature review. So we quickly identified literature which might help us to kind of formulate the actual conditions. Sorry. I must say that we came up with 5 conditions, and it might be that there are actually more, but the number of 5 is kind of a limitation of the method that we will be working with, which I'll explain in a minute. But we feel these 5 are kind of reflecting the body of knowledge which is now available in the literature. So we use qualitative comparative analysis on the basis of 33 semi-structured interviews with representatives of 19 community businesses across England. We sought to kind of include various kinds of contexts, so both urban and rural community businesses in various regions of England, and all with, also with different kind of backgrounds, histories, and also activities. And usually we try to approach CEOs, board members, and other people closely involved with the business. The next point, please. So this QCA is, it's quite a complex method. And I'll try to explain it very briefly. because I don't want to dwell too long upon it, but basically it's a method which is somewhere between a qualitative and a quantitative research method. And it's targeted towards a systematic comparison of configurations of conditions. So it seeks to combine, it seeks to analyze how certain conditions for a certain outcome, and the outcome in our case is durability. It seeks to find out how these various conditions for durability are kind of hanging together and are related together. So if you would talk in quantitative terms, for those of you who are a bit familiar with it, it seems a bit like a kind of regression analysis, with durability as a kind of dependent variable and the conditions as independent variables. But it's all about how they are related. So how different conditions relate together in order to achieve the outcome. And QCA actually kind of unearths how the scoring of conditions is related to score durability. So what we did in relation to the conditions is that for all these community businesses, we made scores on each of the separate conditions on the basis of the interviews, and also on the overall durability as reported in the interviews. And then we used a method to find out with the underlying inferential logics how these factors hang together and how the conditions are as such related. So it's a bit of an abstract, complex way, but it's all about unearthing relations between qualitative conditions. Next point, please. Okay, and what the method actually does is that it distinguishes between two general types of conditions. So on the one hand, the method distinguishes between necessary conditions, and these are, as the word says, conditions which are always present whenever a community business is durable. So I immediately translate it now to the context of this research. So necessary condition is always there. So whatever community business you have that is considered to be durable, you would expect this condition to be there in strength. Second example, a second kind of outcome is what we call a sufficient condition or a combination of conditions which leads to durability. And this refers to the outcome in which the analysis shows that certain conditions might be related together in order to yield a certain outcome, in our case, durability. So it's not about singular conditions, but about combinations of certain conditions which are sufficient to achieve durability. So you see the slight difference between the two. So the necessary one is the one that you should always have whenever a business is considered to be durable. And in the other cases, it's about the combination of conditions which may result in durability. However, if you remember those 5 conditions that we mentioned earlier, it's not the case that you, by definition, need to meet all of the conditions in order to achieve durability. So there can be smaller amounts of conditions met in order to still have the durability outcome. So at this point, I'm just checking whether there might be questions here. To make
no,
sure.
It must be very clear so far because no questions yet.
Okay, if so, then I will continue with the exciting part. Next slide. The outcomes. So of all the 5 conditions that we analyzed on the basis of these 33 interviews in 19 cases, what we found is that aligned entrepreneurial culture is a necessary condition for durability. So this is a key one. So even if community business would meet all the other conditions, all the other 4, but not this one, you would have the situation that this cannot compensate for not having an aligned entrepreneurial culture. So you could have a business which scores well on collective leadership, community engagement, strong networks, and also business model, but it might still not be durable because it's missing the aligned entrepreneurial culture. So this is really a key one of the research, and this is one of the main outcomes. And this is such important, and especially in the current context of the COVID crisis, which actually came jumping in fortunately when we had already kind of completed the fieldwork. So in that sense, the project was not impeded by it, fortunately. But this element of this entrepreneurial culture is now even more important. And this is the reason that we decided to delve even more into it. And this is what Steve will do once I finish my part of the webinar. So we'll dwell more deeply on this particular condition because it's so important in relation to the research and also in relation to the outcomes. Next point, please. Okay, so that was the necessary condition. And we also found two specific combinations of conditions which can be sufficient. So these are combinations which work together to make sure that together they are sufficient to create durability in community businesses. And there's two combinations of a number of conditions. So the first combination that we found is, again, an aligned entrepreneurial culture, collective leadership, and strong networks. So here you see 3 of the 5 conditions met, working together in a particular configuration. The second combination that we found is, again, starting with aligned entrepreneurial culture, but also includes high levels of community engagement and accountability, strong business model, and strong networks. So you see there's differences between the two, and these can be explained actually. Next slide. So what we have is basically a story which shows through the analysis that there is different ways in which you could achieve durability. And that's not necessarily by meeting all 5 conditions, but there's several paths. And basically like the proverbial, there's multiple paths that go to Rome. We found that there actually are 2 paths which move community business to durability. So the first path is the first combination with collective leadership, aligned entrepreneurial culture, and strong networks. And the second one is the path which includes all of them except for collective leadership. So you see that there is some similarities between the 2 paths, but there is also differences. And I will dwell a little bit upon the differences and the similarities between the 2 paths. Just move to the right one. Okay. So what you can see when you compare the 2 paths again is aligned entrepreneurial culture is part of actually both of the paths. And this makes sense, of course, because that we found that this culture is a necessary condition. However, if you compare, if you look closely, you find that strong networks and partnerships actually is a condition in both of the paths. And this might raise the question why strong networks is not a kind of a necessary condition, just like entrepreneurial culture. So we thought about this, and we came up with a kind of explanation for this. So explaining why strong network is not a necessary condition. So what we think was basically that if you talk about durable community business, those ones that are durable, we feel that they do not just network for the sake of networking, but they have a kind of clear understanding about where investments of time will generate productive outcomes in terms of durability. And these outcomes may relate to having an influence upon strategic global agendas, identifying business opportunities, or developing partnerships that add value. So, and if you combine this part of alongside an entrepreneurial culture, if you combine this with collective leadership, community engagement, and a business model, you would actually have the combination that is sufficient for durability. And this is probably an explanation that, as such, as these factors work together, that the strong networks itself is not a single necessary condition, but it is part of a combination which is sufficient to achieve durability. Another interesting finding from our point of view is that when you look at path 1, it does not include the strong business model, where it's included in path 2. The surprising thing actually is when you look at the literature, is that you see that many previous studies actually emphasize the importance of having a strong business model. But still we have a path here which shows that it's not a necessary condition. So it's a sufficient condition as part of a larger configuration. So what we feel is that we think that, of course, this element may make a major contribution towards durability, but it's not decisive. Because we think in the way that community business function, if you have collective leadership, aligned entrepreneurial culture, and strong networks working together in a kind of effective interaction, as it's been done in path 1, then it's not an essential requirement anymore. So it's kind of counterbalanced through the combination of collective leadership, aligned entrepreneurial culture, and strong networks. So of course, this raises some question in the sense of how the factors work together, and in particular about the specific nature and role of aligned entrepreneurial culture. Because collective leadership is probably very clear to everyone that there is a leadership issue, and there's various ways in which you can lead, and it's done collectively in a community business. The networks and the partnerships are in a way quite straightforward, engagement as well, and the business model. But aligned entrepreneurial culture is in a way more elusive, but at the same time, it's of key importance of the function of the community business. And for this reason, Steve will now delve into that particular condition in more detail.
Well, thanks so much. And we just have one question before we move on, and that's, to what extent did you consider non-durable, e.g. failed CBs in your analysis?
Yes, that's a good question. We had a number of them which we considered to be non-durable. So the majority were actually durable. There were also a couple of which we thought that, considering the scores on the conditions, as well as the larger context, that we felt that they are supposedly not durable in the longer term. So I don't know the exact number, there were a couple of cases among the 19 which considered to be non-durable, and I think as a matter of fact there were one or even two which were actually kind of dismantled already. So that's a clear case of non-durability. So the overall balance is just from the top of my head, it's something like 4 or 5 against 14. 14 that were kind of durable through different combinations, and 4 or 5 that were considered by us to be non-durable, or they were already kind of dismantled earlier.
Okay, great, thanks so much. So we're going to hand over to Steve, who will continue with the research presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Clare. Just before moving on to talk further about organisational culture, I just wanted to say that I've worked in and with community businesses for over 30 years as a frontline practitioner for a major funder. I also worked for 10 years with Locality, the national network of community-based enterprises, and also the last 5 to 6 years worked as an independent consultant. So hopefully I've got a fairly in-depth knowledge of the whole community business agenda and perspectives from different angles. So next slide, please. As I say, I wanted to dig further into this aligned entrepreneurial culture, organizational culture, because as Reinout said, that was the one necessary condition that came out of that. All the community businesses that were shown to be durable in our study benefited from an aligned organizational culture. And indeed, our analysis suggested that any community business that lacks this condition is unlikely to survive in the long term. And in the absence of such an aligned culture, you see the sort of consequences which could include a lost sense of mission, disoriented employees, increased staff turnover, through which you lose organizational memory. Things like a damaged public image, as the disconnect between values and day-to-day operations generates cynicism from those observing it, especially customers, which in this case is the local community. So although a strong business model may make a major, back a bit? I'll tell you when I want to move, thanks. So as Reinout said, it's interesting, a lot of the research has been done to date is focused on having a strong business model. And of course that's important. A strong business model makes a major contribution to a business's durability. But we found it not to be a decisive condition. And indeed, we found 3 cases that were durable, but didn't have a strong business model. Now, is that surprising? Is it surprising that a community business without a strong business model can still be durable, can still be capable of existing in the long term? And I have to say, for me, it actually wasn't. And that's why I emphasize my background. I've been to so many organizations over the years where you walk in the door and you're immediately hit by an energy, a buzz, a feeling, that little sort of element of magic. And that, I think, is a manifestation of the organizational culture. And I think without that, you can tell when you walk through the door of some organizations, this is something special. And as I said, that's about having the aligned culture. Can we have the next slide, please? I think this is a really useful slide. If you look at it, above the water, this is the old iceberg analogy, but above the water, the way we say we get things done. And there's all those things that you takes love, vision, and strategy, and goals and policies and all that sort of stuff. But then beneath the water, There's the way we really get things done. And which do you think is most powerful? I suggest the way we really get things done is actually what matters. I remember working with one CEO I worked with many, many years ago. And it really amused me that we had an internal problem, and her response was to disappear for 2 or 3 hours and come back with a 15-page policy and said, right, problem solved. And I'd say, no, I don't think it is. It really isn't. Just giving people a 15-page policy isn't going to change things. People probably won't read it, they certainly won't act on it. It's about much more than just bits of paper. It's also interesting here, if you look, above water, you have values, and below water, you also have values. You have the official values of the organization, but you also have the unofficial values. And again, I would ask, which do you think are the most important? Next slide. Lovely. Every company has got an organizational culture it designs, what you might say above the water, and an organizational culture that it lives, which is the bit below the water. And the challenge is, are those two the same? Now, older members of the audience might remember an American company called Enron. The Enron scandal in 2001 led to the bankruptcy of the Enron Corporation, which was a huge American energy company based in Texas, and also led effectively to the dissolution of Arthur Andersen, which was at the time one of the 5 biggest audit and accountancy partnerships in the world. And Enron's leaders bankrupted the company through fraud, and they went to jail with lengthy sentences. And yet, if you walked into their head office, in the company lobby, in the lobby to the office, on the wall, big placard about the company's values, the values that were supposed to communicate Enron's organizational culture. And those values were integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. But unfortunately, there was quite a gap between the words chosen to define the company's culture and the leadership behavior that served as the foundation of the real culture at that company. If there was a plaque in the lobby to communicate the real organizational culture, it would have read lack of integrity, lack of communication, lack of respect, and lack of excellence. So it's the real organizational culture, the one about behavior and actions. That's the real truth about who we are and how we do things. It's a powerful force that can either drive an organization of business to produce outstanding results or to dig itself an early grave. And it's this real organizational culture that I think is what people pay attention to. It's a mix, it's a pattern of values, of beliefs, of behavioral norms and practices that evolve in an organization based on the actions and behaviors of the people who work for it, what they pay attention to, what they reward, what they punish, and where and how they allocate resources. It's about respect or lack of respect. It's about how they treat colleagues and clients and suppliers, customers, stakeholders, and that will resonate throughout the business. Next slide, please. Does this look familiar? I've certainly worked for organizations where an incoming chief executive has sought to revamp vision and mission and values, but it's often been a top-down process rather than a bottom-up process. We might end up with a set of values that, again, they're proudly pinned to the wall, but nobody ever looks at them. There's no sense of ownership. Nobody pays any attention to them. And certainly, some of the places I've worked, we certainly didn't live the values that were on the poster on the wall, or if we did, it was by default. An example of an official culture that was imaginary rather than real. It was above the waterline rather than below the waterline. And I would argue that unless everybody walks the talk of an innovative, competitive, customer-focused organization, one that genuinely values integrity, mutual respect, collaboration, accountability, diversity, and most importantly, a positive, supportive relationship with colleagues, then the talk becomes meaningless. Employees become unhappy and unproductive, relationships disintegrate, attitudes become dysfunctional, morale deteriorates, and any positive energy the business might have will quickly dissipate. Next slide. Right, I've committed the cardinal sin here, doing a slide that's just words, 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 words. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you'll hopefully be able to access this afterwards. But this is a framework of 8 different sort of cultural styles or factors that can give you some sort of guidance about what comprises a coherent and aligned organizational culture. It was developed originally by the HR consultancy Spencer Stewart alongside the Harvard Business School, and is based on a global study of 230 companies and 1,300 managers, although I have to say I've adapted it quite a lot. But if you just look at those things, looking at mapping the culture of caring, of purpose, of identity, communication, learning, enjoyment, results, and what they call order, again, I think it flags up the difference between, do you talk about the specific values in your business? You know, ask yourself, are we inclusive? Does that actually make any difference? I think it's much more productive to ask about behaviors, where behaviors demonstrate that everybody within the business acts in line with the values. So it's not what's on your strategy, it's not what's on your wall, it's about people's behavior that reflect the real organizational culture, what's happening beneath the waterline. Now, leadership's got a lot to do with this, and if we can have the next slide. Thank you. I just want to jump sideways about this because leadership's clearly very important. But I want to emphasize, in my view, leadership is nothing to do with seniority. It's nothing to do with someone's position in the hierarchy of an organization. I'm sure we've all seen chief executives who are not leaders, and we've seen leaders who are not chief executives, but really set the tone of an organization. And these are often the frontline delivery staff who are working hands-on with the people who need the most in our communities. So just to repeat that point, leadership and management are not the same thing. They're 2 very different things. Now, of course, you need good management. Managers need to plan, to measure, to monitor, to coordinate, to solve, hire, fire, and lots of other things as well. But managers manage things, and leaders lead people. And again, I want to emphasize, leadership is a verb, not a noun, and that's really important. Leadership is an act of doing something. It's not a thing. You can't put it in a wheelbarrow. It's much more intangible. And that, for me, is the starting point in understanding leadership. It's about taking action. It's about doing something. It's about changing the world in some way. And leadership's also an act of humility, an act of service to others. And that sort of leadership can happen at every level of an organization. And having an aligned organizational entrepreneurial culture is about everybody being a leader, everybody living the values, everybody taking responsibility, everybody pulling together in the same direction. So in short, that culture, it's a whole mix of metaphors and symbols, stories and myths, ceremonies and rituals, norms and rules of the game, the organization's philosophy, attitudes, beliefs, declared and undeclared values, as well as the most profound convictions. None of those individually determines an organizational culture, but put them all together and you'll reflect the concept. You'll see what the organization actually is, not what it says it is, but what it really is. Can we have next slide, please? Now, as I was thinking about this, I mean, in some ways, you know, having a strong entrepreneurial culture is quite intangible. As I say, sometimes you walk through the door, you can feel it. You can feel it. But it can be intangible because so much of it is unwritten. It's beneath the surface. But on the other hand, in some ways, organizational culture is really clear. You know, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and it sounds like a duck, it's a duck. But most of all, I think that culture is the glue that binds everything together. And when I was thinking about it, I think that culture is actually both the precondition and the result of the other 4 conditions. If you have the right culture, then I think you'll see a different sort of leadership. You'll see a leadership that's distributed, that's open, that operates at every level, that's focused on learning and innovation. It's not about the, you know, the Richard Branson type of leader in a business. It's about that distributed leadership, and that reflects culture. Community engagement and accountability, again, the attitude a community business takes to community engagement and accountability will be determined by its culture. Networks and partnerships, again, the approach, the willingness to collaborate, to share, to be outward facing, and so on. And the business model, again, not just what you deliver, but how you deliver. I think they're all framed. It's as I say, it's almost working in the background with those other four factors. And at the same time, those factors impact on your organizational culture. It's you know, it becomes almost a sort of a virtuous circle, or perhaps more accurately, a virtuous spiral, where they work on each other, reinforce and determine. And I think that's why having a strong entrepreneurial culture has proved to be so important, why it's the only necessary condition that came out of the research, because it pulls all those other things together and it creates the framework within which they operate. And I'll just end with one last quote. This is from a guy called Tony Sire, who's an American internet entrepreneur. I just like this quote because, as he said, if you get the culture right, most of the other stuff like great customer service or building a great long-term brand or empowering passionate employees and customers will happen on its own. That's how important that the culture of the organization, having that aligned, everyone pulling together, the aligned entrepreneurial culture. And that's why I wasn't surprised when our research showed that for a durable community business, that's the one thing that's non-negotiable. It has to be there. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Steve. That was fantastic, really clear, and really, yeah, it makes loads of sense. We have a couple of questions. The first one would be, how do you develop an entrepreneurial culture? And do you have any examples for us?
I think that the slide I showed that has loads and loads of words on it, I think provides a framework to look at that. What I would say is an entrepreneurial culture, because it's you know, it is about the myths and the legends and the historical memory and so on. Senior management, leadership, the leadership team can obviously have a huge impact and can do something, but I don't think culture change is something you can impose from above. It's got to be something that is genuinely collective. As I say, in my experience, very often the tone of an organization is set not by the chief exec. Sometimes it is, absolutely sometimes it is. Some of the chief execs I interviewed, stunning, astonishing, wonderful, inspirational people. But often the tone of an organization is set by the people at reception or the people delivering the services and so on. So for me, yes, you can start the process, you can lead the process, you can provide a framework to take things forward as a senior manager. But I think unless it understands and reflects the bottom-up approach as well, it's not going to make the sort of change that you want. There's lots of stuff on the internet around changing culture and so on. A lot of it does tend to be a bit top-down. But I think, you know, what I'm saying here reflects the community business. Anyone in community businesses knows how important, you know, that whole community engagement, accountability, that bottom-up stuff, that respect, garnering the passion of your frontline staff, you know, you will know how important that is. So for me, it's that two-way process. It's about listening and talking and engaging within a structured fashion. Sorry, that's a bit rambling. There's no easy answer because, as I say, the organizational culture permeates everything. But look at that slide, which has got loads and loads of words on, and I think it'll give you a bit of a focus about what you look at. But it's about behaviors. That behaviors are what are important, not words on a bit of paper.
That's great, thanks. I'll just say, if we have got a couple of minutes left, so if anyone listening does want to pop a question in the Q&A box, we've got a couple of minutes to take a few more. There are a couple coming in, but we do have a bit of time for some more. So the next question, was the mix of requirements for durability different for organisations of different size? And it's got people and turnover, etc. in brackets.
I'm reading the question now, also from the chat box.
Yeah, I'll read that again. Sorry, was the mix of requirements for durability different for organisations of different size?
Well, it's not so much a mix of requirement, but what we've been looking at is, by definition, that all kinds of different organizations with different size. And then the thing whether the issue whether a condition or requirement is actually met totally depends on the particular situation, the particular context. So, for example, on the one hand, you might have a relatively small community business with just very few people who's doing a great thing and is durable, but you might also have a bigger one with several people employed and a huge staff of volunteers. So the sizes were indeed different, but what we always did with the interviewees is to discuss all the conditions as well as the durability in the particular context of the organization. So, and that means that even though they might be very different in size in terms of people of turnover, they might still be or be not durable in relation to the particular context.
I'll just add to that. I mean, I did the interviews with the 19 community businesses, and as Reinout said, some of them are very, very large indeed. Some of them were actually quite small. And I have to say, I didn't see or feel any particular difference in terms of size and in terms of the importance of the different factors and so on. So I don't think size does bring challenges as you get bigger and bigger. There can be a danger of having to institute, a more bureaucratic system. But I think that's the above water stuff, not the below water stuff. Yeah. The below water stuff, I think, is common across the board.
Great, thanks. Was there a particular mix of factors that tended to lead to growth as well as durability?
I'm not sure whether growth is something here as durability. So in terms of looking at durability, there were two kind of combinations. You could say two paths that were clearly kind of sufficient to achieve durability, and it does not exclude other configurations, but there were two which were kind of clearly standing out. But I'm not sure how that applies to growth, because growth as such was not an indicator of durability or of the business model itself. So it would also depend a little bit on how growth is defined here, because we didn't look at particular growth in itself, because growth might help in terms of durability, it might also impede it. In a way, so the answer would depend a little bit on how growth is defined here in this particular context.
Okay, maybe the person who asked the question would like to clarify that point, but no worries if not. A bit of a long one next. Passion and passionate culture very often beats countless hours poured out over development of a business model. But did you find any evidence that different personality types and makeup of teams will either thrive under or be frustrated by this?
If I can take that, that's a great question. It's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Some years back, when I was working for Locality, we published something called Bearing Fruit, which was a research project into successful rural-based community development trusts. And as part of that process, we didn't just interview and analyze, we actually also did some modeling utilizing neuro-linguistic programming techniques. And we also used the Myers-Briggs profile, which, by the way, is complete nonsense, but we used it. What was interesting, we only had a small control group of 6 people, but 5 out of the 6 had almost identical, according to these tools, almost identical personality types. And you could almost come out of it thinking, here is a specific personality type that you want to recruit for to lead a community development trust, a community business. So that was quite interesting. But There are other issues around. It's the idea of a charismatic leader. Quite often when businesses are set up, it's a small group of people who respond to some sort of community challenge. And you can have the great charismatic leaders. I think, we've all seen them. And they do wonderful, wonderful stuff. They won't take no, they make things happen, etc. But it was interesting that some of the businesses that I interviewed as part of this study, where I spoke to chief executives for whom I have the absolute utmost respect, people, giants of our movement. But what was interesting, they were saying one of the real challenges that faced their organization was the succession strategy about what's going to happen when they move on. And that is a real challenge. Again, interestingly, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I came out of this whole process thinking, I don't think I'd work for an organization that didn't have a woman chief executive, because the women chief execs I talked to, all of them had a really inclusive and distributed team. And they all said, oh, if I got run over by a bus tomorrow, nobody would notice. People would be able to step in, no problem. Whereas some of the male-led organizations, not all, some honorable exceptions, but some of them would sort of say, well, if I was run over by a bus tomorrow, there'd be total chaos. So the charismatic leadership, or the one you talked about, the necessary but highly irritating visionary, I think, in a way, this is basically about teams. Teams need a mix of different people. You need the people. I know there's somebody listening to this webinar right now who's a real big picture thinker, who thinks in terms of big stuff. But you also need people who think about the detail. You need the people who sometimes seem negative because they go, but. But they're the ones who dig into the detail of making things happen. So, I think I love visionaries, but I also love people who say, right, okay, let's sit down. How do we turn that into practice? What specifically do you need to do? So again, it's this distributed leadership approach that I think it's about having a different mix of views so that you can, you can get the best. You can come out with something bigger than the sum of its parts. An important bit of that to me is talking to frontline delivery staff as part of that picture as well.
Okay, that's great. So we just have one more question, but if anyone, oh no, we had another one come in. Yeah, there's still time to put your questions in, so please do. So the next question is, how did you measure tone?
Wow, thanks you.
That's from you.
I mean, interestingly, as I say, I think when you're looking at entrepreneurial culture, organizational culture, there is an element where it is about feel. It is about just what you see around you, and that is really difficult to measure. But I have to say, I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple of days ago who is a world-class evaluator. She's one of the best, if not the best, I've ever met. And she was going, oh yeah, this is easy. You can measure that sort of stuff. I didn't ask her how, but she seemed to think you could. So I can't answer that, Hugh, but I can say that I'm pretty convinced you can measure this sort of stuff. And another great bit of research, I would have thought.
Okay, thanks. One final question at the moment, unless someone wants to get another one in. I understand that you were looking at durability, but are you able to comment on whether there was a different mix for a business bringing something new to the market as opposed to a business that had a more developed offer?
Yeah, I think we've seen all kinds of types of businesses with either a kind of long-standing practice in terms of, for example, service delivery, or a couple of them were actually bringing something new to the market, and everything in between. And also the more interesting ones who combine several things at the same time. So the more of established activities, either services or specific activities, or completely new things. With all kinds of different outcomes. So from the interviews, I don't think there was any clear pattern in relation to whether the different mix made a difference. Because Well, actually, one of the community businesses that was wound up a couple of times ago, that was considered by us as one of the non-durable cases, used to be quite entrepreneurial. I think it was the Linmouth Trust, and they were developing all kinds of things. And they developed, for example, a very specific kind of chocolate, specifically for the market, and it worked a while, but it didn't sustain over time. So we've seen any kind of combination, and sometimes with good result, and sometimes with not such a good result. And of course, also considering because of changing conditions, that something which originally looked quite fine over the years turned out to be not as attractive anymore. And then as a result of a kind of entrepreneurial culture, the business changing its activity into doing something else or something new. So yeah, we've seen all kinds of differences, but I don't think there is a kind of particular pattern to be identified, which actually has a kind of specific independent effect on durability.
Again, from my perspective, having talked to the organisations, I didn't see any difference. I saw some of the big organisations, you know, the turnover of 6 to 8 million plus or something, who were still flexible, who were still agile, who were still bringing new things onto the market, even though they had a sort of, you know, a stable offer. Conversely, some of the smaller organisations that I interviewed, some were flexible, some were agile, some were innovative, some of them weren't. So I didn't see size having any impact on that. As I say, I think it's more about attitude and ambition and the sort of thing I was talking about before. It's the culture that underlies the organization that frames all these different things. So size, yes, does make a difference. But I didn't find it a significant difference in terms of that question about you know, new products and established products.
Yeah, just to shortly add to that, what you would expect over time by definition as a result of an aligned entrepreneurial culture is that whatever the mix would be, it would by definition change over time because of changing conditions and also changing opportunities to develop new businesses. And any community business that would take that on seriously would over time develop some of its activities and discard of some other activities, and actually constantly be involved in the process of revising them and trying to develop something new in the context of the business and the local community. So the mix itself is a dynamic thing by definition, I would say.
Hey, great. We've actually got a question in the chat box, which is it the community aspect of community businesses which enables them to be durable without a strong business model?
Yeah, I would say it is for a number of reasons. Not the least one is that the activities which the business then develops are actually targeted towards the community. So it means that there is a need or an interest in them. So there would be what you could call, I wouldn't like to use the word customers, but it would be an audience or an interest group for the activities itself. But also in terms of supporting the business and keeping it alive. Community aspect is actually crucial to that, because otherwise it would just be a regular commercial or semi-commercial business or a social enterprise without any connection to the locality. So in a way, in that sense, it's a community which is also vital to durability over the long term, because it cannot just depend on a CEO and a few board members.
I think that's a great, so I was just to say, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think when you've got everybody working from home, that's a real challenge in terms of developing or maintaining the sort of organizational culture that you've got. And, you know, I think that's why a lot of people have had to look very differently at how line management or support for colleagues and mental health for colleagues and so on is addressed in the current situation. I also think, you know, what's happening at the moment has driven a lot of innovation in terms of delivery. But I think it's in my own views, it's going to make innovating different sorts of things as opposed to delivering more challenging. I think I think my response is, I've got no bloody idea at the moment. I think it's one of the challenges for all of us as to how we respond and come up with new stuff. but how you keep people together and how you value and respond to people, it's going to be a huge challenge.
I think this question follows on nicely. In the context of COVID-19 and what will come next for community businesses, especially those whose income generation has taken a dive, what are the key questions you believe they should be asking now, particularly in relation to opportunities and diversification, rather than simply returning to how it was before?
Yeah, in a way, Steve just said, I haven't got a bloody idea, and I will actually feel that there's an answer to this question as well. However, of course, there's no question that it, in a way, should try to adapt because of the current situation. Because when you talk about, the question is about income generation. And of course, I'm a scientist and I cannot look into the future. But considering the situation, I don't think we will, for a long time, get to the situation which is somehow comparable to how it was before. Simply because of all kinds of lockdown conditions and restrictions on all kind of normal interaction between people. So the only thing that they can try in the current context, I think, is to consider what they can reasonably continue or develop new using the means and opportunities that you have right now. And of course, that often excludes all kind of offline and in-person interaction. And over time, they will pose a danger, because that is an important element of sustaining community. Because I don't believe that we can sustain a community online only. So over time, we need to be able to look each other in the eye, stand close to each other, pat each other on the shoulder, etc., etc. But in the short term, it's about trying to think what you can do from the current limited situation of means, working from home, from behind your computer, to think about activities that might still be developed or continued or maybe developed anew. But that is a bloody difficult situation. I think a difficult starting point as well, because you're so, in a way, kind of limited. But on the other end, looking at the cases that we've seen, I would not be surprised if there's many community businesses that actually come up with kind of brilliant ideas, in particular in relation and in the context of these limitations, and to make something smart out of that. And if they can do that, they were probably the ones that's succeeding to maybe start generate a kind of income again. And another maybe more dull answer to the question is that in terms of income generation, it would be great if either local institutions or the national ones will be able to at least offer temporal financial support, at least to kind of bridge the temporary situation. But that would not be an answer to the situation, the post-crisis new normal, what it's often be called, because I think no one is currently able to actually predict how it's going to work.
Steve, did you want to add to? No? I was quite excited about ending the webinar on no bloody idea then. I thought that would be a first. Thank you for elaborating. So that's all for questions. And so thanks to everyone for putting your questions in the Q&A box, and for everyone who took part. Just one final question to you, all the panelists. It might be Amelia who answers, but where can we find this research and further information?
Sure, so I can take this one. It's all uploaded to our website at the moment. So if you go to the Power to Change website and then click on the Research Institute tab, and I'm just refreshing my memory now. I think there should be an area where it says publications. So you'll be able to find it there. But yeah, I also just wanted to thank you both for presenting today. It's been really interesting working with you on this piece and hearing more from you today. So thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So yeah, that's all for today. Everyone who signed up to the webinar will be emailed a recording of the webinar or a link to it, and this will also, the webinar itself will be available on the Power to Change website as well as the research in the research section. Okay, so thanks to all the presenters today and everyone who listened. Take care everyone, and yeah, stay safe and well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and thank you to Power to Change for funding this work. It was really interesting, and we learned a lot as well. I hope we can share that learning. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks. I can only second that. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.